afraid you can in Russian. All right. All of this makes some sense? All right, because you need to have some conception of this before we go on to the next step. Can I erase this motion? Students? I'm not used to having two blackboards in the room, but... all right. When we go on to prefixed verbs of motion, well, I'll give you a bit of the theory right now, and then we'll go through the prefixes themselves, and then we'll go on to the formation. When you go on to the prefixed verbs of motion, when you put a prefix onto the multidirectional one, you're going to get an imperfective verb, and when you put a prefix onto the unidirectional verb, you're going to get a perfective verb. Notice I didn't say anything about multidirectional, unidirectional, and that's because prefixed verbs of motion don't play this game. Prefixed verbs of motion only have one perfective and one imperfective. They're actually easier than other verbs of motion because they behave like every other verb of motion. One imperfective, one perfective. The same rules of aspect, perfective and imperfective, apply. The danger is that you've been trained when you see a verb of motion to think unidirectional, multidirectional, that when you see these prefixed ones, that light goes on. It's very easy to think, to fall back into this pattern. But the prefixed verbs of motion are easier because you don't have to worry about all of this. So that's the one caveat here. All right. У вас есть учебники? Учебники есть. На странице 148. Вот картинка какая-то есть? Кажется, есть. Вот. Хорошо. All right. First, let's just go through what these prefixes mean, and then we'll worry about how we actually form the verbs with these. There's a whole bunch of these here. Your textbook does a disservice to you in this respect. It gives you all of the prefixes, it shows you the little pictures, all of which are very useful. It shows you how to form the verbs, but it doesn't tell you which prepositions go with which prefixes, which is kind of important when you actually want to use these. You want to say you are arriving at a place. You want to say you are going up to something or to someone. So it's kind of a little tricky to use these without knowing the prepositions. So we're going to go through the prefixes, but I'm also going to give you the prepositions and the cases that they take, because that's something you have to know as well. Most of these, fortunately, come in pairs. There's opposites. So we can pretend like we're back with Sesame Street again. We can go over near, far. We have arrive, and we have leave. We have enter, and we have exit. So I would learn these in these pairs. Get the opposites at the same time. It makes it a little bit easier to remember. All right, so we have the prefix pod. You've had this as a preposition before, right? Pod means under. Pod stolom. When used with a verb of motion, pod means up to. It means up to. Я подхожу к доске. Pod is used for walking up to people. Человек подошел ко мне и спросил, где находится Большой театр. So it's used for walking up to something, usually over a fairly small distance. There is another prefix for reaching something after a long distance. This is going up to something after a small, a small increment of distance. So there's pod. As I just used, the prefix that it takes is k. That takes which case? Dative. К чему, к кому. K plus dative. Я подошел к милиционеру. Up to the car. All right, its opposite, so like stepping away from something, is at. The preposition that it takes is, anyone care to venture a guess?
Oh, what do you mean?
What preposition? So, put takes k, at takes ya atashol.
Trick question.
Yeah, I didn't think it.
Well, say you want to say I stepped away from the blackboard. There's a reason I think that you might be able to guess this, because the prefix at takes Tom at. Easy enough to remember. Ja atashol at daski. Ja atashol at pamitnika. Stepped away from the monument. At takes what case?
Sure.
Genitive. At daski. All right. The next one, which are definitely, this is definitely one of the more used partners here. Pri and u, these mean to arrive and to leave. To arrive and to leave. So pri, приходить, прийти. These are going to take the same ones as that you're used to with verbs of motion. You arrive to a place. So прийти, v, or na, plus accusative. Motion towards. Я пришел на работу. Я пришел в общежитие.
You said this was arrived?
Yes, yeah. To arrive or to come as well. Приходите ко мне. Come over to my place. U means to depart, to leave. Have you had this before? Do you know what the opposite of na are? Yes, and ease. I guess I haven't had this before. I know it's covered in the second book, but I don't teach the second book enough to remember exactly which chapter everything is in. All right. If a noun takes v when you're going to it, it will take ease when you go away from it. If the noun takes na when you go to it, it will take s or sa when you leave it. Which is the one?
Also accusative? Or
No,
not?
no, oh no, yes. Let's get the case up here as well. Ease or sa plus genitive. Ease or s plus genitive. I know you're used to s taking instrumental, s ručkой, sa studentami, but when s means from, it uses genitive case, not instrumental case. So я иду в общежитие, я ушел из общежития. Я иду на стадион, я пришел со стадиона. Со стадиона. Later on in the book we'll do this in a little bit more detail, so we don't need to dwell as much on this now. What else do we have? All right, we have pera, which does not have an opposite. Pera, as your little picture indicates, means through or across. It is one of the few ones that does not use a preposition. It can take a direct object. So it's just going to be accusative case. Перешел улицу. I crossed the streets.
Do you use it for like bridges?
Yes, перешел мост. Absolutely, go across the bridge. Absolutely. There are prepositions you can use with this, but they're rare prepositions, so we'll just stick to the prefix pera plus accusative. Right, so pri and u may be the most used. The next partner is probably the second most useful partner, and it's v and its antonym is vui. To American students, these can be a little tricky to differentiate with your ear, vui, particularly in full, Russians going full speed, that we can be so quick that it's easy to confuse this. So this is something to work on. But this will not be its own syllable. It will blend into the word vchadit. Still chadit 2 syllables, vchadit 2 syllables. Et 2 syllables, vaiti 2 syllables. When you add the vui in there, vuichadit 3 syllables. Actually, the next one, viti, is a bad example, but at least you have a vowel change there. Vaiti to enter, viti to exit. So vot means to go into, to enter. You're used to this because the preposition v means in. So the prefix v means to go into, and vui is the opposite, out of, to leave. Right, so be careful, watch when, don't confuse these two. Vui means to be inside of something, and then to be outside of something. You know, that's what it means. It does not mean so much to leave, like the prefix u does. U means to depart, to go off somewhere else. Vui means simply to be out of something after you've been inside it. Same usage. Я вошел в комнату. Well, you're really not going to need na with this verb because anything that you can be inside of is going to be a vo word anyway. I offhand can't think of an example where you would need na with this prefix. Leave it to Russian to come up with something, but we'll just stick with the plus accusative.
Can you be in the stadium, but it's still na?
Yes. Yeah, you need a... Yeah, if you ever need to indicate that, like, you walked through the door of the stadium or something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this is the game you play, is you can come up with examples, but they're like these bizarre, stilted things that you probably never actually need to say, but in theory, possible.
Or na pocztu.
Yes, the building, not pocztu.
Right.
Not pocztu. Not there. Parentheses. All right, vui. Again, mostly you're going to use is here when you exit. Я вышел из комнаты. I left the room, and then we'll put the saw there in parentheses as well. And then the last one that they give you is another one that doesn't have a partner, pra. The prefix pra means past or by. The most used instance of this one is a phrase like prakhaditya. Go, go past, move it along, keep it moving. Prakhaditya, or please, you know, letting someone through. It's also the verb you use on a bus or a train when you need to go through a certain number of stops. But again, then we're getting into prepositions you're going to learn later. So this is a future chapter. We'll work with this one some more.